The Burning Abyss deck was released in 2014 as a TCG exclusive archetype. All of the main deck monsters can summon themselves from hand if you have no back row and die if you control a non-Burning Abyss monster. They also all have an effect when they're sent to grave. The most notable were Graph, who could summon from deck, Seer, who could summon from grave, Farfa, who could banish a monster for a turn, and Skarm, who could add any level 3 Dark Fiend in the end phase. This all served to summon their boss monster, Dante, who could mill 3 to pump up his attack, which would likely trigger some additional effects, and add back a BA when he's sent to grave. Later on, they would also get Beatrice, who could be ranked up over Dante and could dump any card as a quick effect. So why is it broken? This deck had so much gas. Every name could potentially be spammed out to very consistently get to Dante, and that guy just printed advantage. And once you got both Seer and Dante in rotation, you had an infinite loop. Seer could keep resummoning Dante, and Dante could keep adding back Seer. The deck would back this up with a bunch of traps and play as a powerful control deck. In 2016, it would re-emerge alongside the new Phantom Knight cards and make a very strong rank 3 spam deck, and the deck would be playable one more time in 2019 alongside their new Link monster and Block Dragon. This Monster Mash deck used Cherubini to dump cards like Graph to spam out material to eventually mill Block Dragon off Curious, who could add Fossil Dyna and win the game. This was the last time it would ever see real play. So what happened? BA was one of the longest running decks out there. It was tiered from 2014 to 2016. It even managed to see play during Necros format, and it wasn't awful after that, but the hits it received just started to catch up. Nowadays, the cards just don't do enough, and needing to find ways to negate their effects makes it much harder to splash them into other decks. Also, Beatrice is banned now, but being off and on playable for 5 years is not bad at all. Inzektor was a deck released in 2012 and was built around equipping their monsters to each other to trigger various effects. All of the main Inzektors could equip another from hand or grave as a soft once per turn. Then they either had an effect while equipped, or an effect when something equipped to them was sent to grave. The main 3 were Centipede, who added an Inzektor when its equip was sent to grave, Dragonfly, who could summon an Inzektor from deck when its equip went to grave, and Hornet, who could send itself while it was equipped to pop a card. None of these effects were once per turn. So why was it broken? Inzektor was a combo deck that ate boards for breakfast. Hornet plus Dragonfly popped 2 cards while also searching for follow-up and making a rank 3. This led to the deck not only being strong going first, since they had ways to plus off popping their own cards, but a menace going second. This would get the deck significantly hit later that year. Hornet and Dragonfly would stay limited until 2019, when they finally went to 3. So what happened? Limiting Dragonfly and Hornet completely killed the deck, and the fact they were still limited when Orcust came out is insane to me. They did win a custom card contest back in 2020, though even when that card came out in 2022, it did nothing to help the deck. A 2-card combo deck that loses to Ash is very bad at modern Yu-Gi-Oh! Infernity was a deck released in 2010 that revolved around having no cards in your hand. All their cards either had a powerful effect when your hand is empty, or an effect to empty your hand. Major cards include Infernity Archfiend, who, if your hand is empty, adds an Infernity card on special summon, Necromancer, who can reborn an Infernity as a soft once per turn if your hand is empty, Launcher, a continuous spell that can be sent to grave to summon 2 Infinities from grave if your hand is empty, and Barrier, which is an Omni Negate for the deck. None of these are hard once per turn. So why is it broken? Infernity was a crazy combo deck. It was one of the first decks that could genuinely set up an unbreakable board. It wasn't super hard to search and set up multiple Infernity barriers, which, when backed up by any of the powerful synchro monsters from the time, was impossible to break through. Fun fact, Barrier was actually a TCG exclusive card, meaning this deck that was already meta in the OCG got an insane buff when it came out here. This would get Launcher limited after only a few months. Being able to activate multiple in one turn was insane when each summon got you a negate. Now this deck was strong when synchros were the only thing they were summoning, but once Xyz came out, it got even better. One problem the deck would run into is needing to constantly have a tuner on board to sync the Archfiend away, but now with Xyz monsters, you just needed any other 4. This would eventually get Infernity Archfiend limited in 2014, basically killing the deck. So what happened? 1 Launcher, 1 Archfiend just isn't doable, and even though Archfiend is now at 3, it doesn't do much without 3 launchers. The deck is also just not built for the modern age. Since you need to have no cards in hand, it's really hard to run hand traps and non-engine in general, and since the deck is so old, it really struggles to play through interruptions. But as we've seen in the OCG and Master Duel, once the deck gets going, it's as though nothing changed. Kozmo was a deck released in 2015 as a TCG exclusive archetype. It was primarily known for its unique inspiration, being a cross between Star Wars and the Wizard of Oz, as well as its ability to OTK with giant untargetable monsters. The deck has 2 halves. There's the Psychic Pilots, who can banish themselves to tag into higher level Kozmo from hand, and Machine Ships, who are big boss monsters that float when they're destroyed. Notable cards include Farm Girl, who can add a Kozmo when it deals battle damage, Tin Can, who randomly adds a Kozmo in the end phase, Slip Rider, who pops back row on summon, and Dark Destroyer, who can't be targeted and pops a monster on summon. So why was it broken? Kozmo was a very popular deck. It had great art, a simple game plan, and was very powerful. It won the first YCS that took place 2 days after its second wave of support was released. The main goal of the deck was to get Farm Girl to connect, because if she did, the game was over, since she could add a ship that could not only attack as well, but continue to pick apart the opponent's board. Speaking of attacking, this deck was very good at killing. Since any Kozmo can tag into any higher level one, you could pretty easily have every monster in your hand attack. And if you couldn't kill, you could just sit on one of your untargetable ships that floated if your opponent still managed to pop them. This deck would take on a few iterations, from builds that played 20 traps and Demise to builds that played Fire King Island. It would see play until 2016. So what happened? The main issue with this deck was how bricky it was. You needed to draw pilots plus ships, which was easier said than done. And after Dark Destroyer got limited in 2016, the deck was basically dead. Blackwing was released in 2009, and after a second wave of support in the next set, became one of the best decks of the 5Ds era. Notable cards include Shura, who summons a Blackwing from deck when it destroys something by battle, Gale, a tuner who can summon itself from hand if you control Blackwing and can also have the attack of an opponent's monster, and Black Whirlwind, a continuous spell that adds a Blackwing when you normal summon. There are many other great cards, but we'd be here all day if I listed them all. So why was it broken? Blackwing played like an old school aggro deck. You normal summoned a rather large man and then just started attacking. Cards like Shura and Bora were great at hitting over all the small flip monsters people use from the time, and cards like Gale and Kalut let you hit over monsters bigger than your own. And they also had access to one of the strongest trap cards from the time, Icarus Attack. Icarus Attack tributes a wing beast to pop 2 cards. This made it one of the best cards to play when you're ahead, so you could deal with any of the battle traps that would otherwise stop you. But the thing to tie it all together was Whirlwind. The main problem with an aggro deck is running out of monsters, but Whirlwind adding a Blackwing every turn meant you never ran out of gas. This led to Blackwing being very popular for a long time, due to the deck being both very simple and very strong. The deck would receive several limitations throughout the many years it was playable, and it would finally stop seeing play around 2014, once Duelist Alliance came out. So what happened? This deck got very power crept, though the fact it managed to see any amount of play for as long as it did is very impressive, not even mentioning some of the variants that came from people revisiting Edison. It has since received a ton of support. It's actually one of the most supported decks. It has more cards in it than the entire Illusion type. Unfortunately, most of them are terrible. They have been a decent rogue deck at certain points, but nowadays they just summon a towers or burn you to death. DAD was a powerful deck from around 2009, and it was the final form of the DAD decks. This version used the new psychic monsters to give the deck a whole other axis with synchros. Notable cards include the man himself, Dark Arm Dragon, who could summon itself from hand when there are 3 darks in grave, and can banish a dark from grave to pop a card, neither effect being once per turn. Emergency Teleport, a quick play spell that summons a level 3 or lower psychic from deck, and the thing you were often summoning was Krebons, who is a level 2 tuner that could pay 800 life to negate an attack that targeted it. So why was it broken? Despite the name of the deck being a combination of 2 specific cards, this deck was much more than just them. Telly and DAD were by far the strongest cards, but Krebons was insane at stalling, Malicious was multiple tribute fodder as well as synchro material, Allure of Darkness and Destiny Drug gave the deck a ton of draw power, and of course it could play Crush Card Virus. This deck was the culmination of over a year's worth of dark monsters that came together to form this. The main goal was to get Malicious in the grave to then use it as 2 separate 6-star bodies for synchro plays, and with 3 emergency teleport and tons of draw spells, it wasn't hard to find your tuners. And if all else fails, DAD can easily clean up any board. And because of priority, even if you tried to remove it on summon, it would take something down with it. This deck and its variants, because any dark deck could be played with the shell, would be top tier for a long time, being one of the longest tier 0 decks ever, before getting half the deck limited in 2009. So what happened? The deck got hit too hard. Though even after the Telad deck died, the individual cards would see play for years to come. DAD and Allure were staples in dark decks for years, Telly is playable today, and Malicious gave the semi-limited list a reason to exist. Nowadays the deck would obviously be bad, but it's nice to see the cards still see play. Pepe, or Performer Pal Pendulum, was the shortest lived tier 0 deck. It was only playable for 1 month at the start of 2016, and the goal of the deck was to use the near infinite material provided from the Performer Pal Before Mage cards to summon a ton of rank 4s and drown your opponent in advantage. And because Master Roll 3 was awesome, you could summon back your entire extra deck every turn if you had scales. Notable cards include Plushfire, who summons a Perform Mage from deck when destroyed, not once per turn, Luster Pendulum, who can pop a scale to add another copy of that scale, Monkey Board, who is a 1-card scale, and Skullcrabat Joker, who is just Stratos at a time when that card was banned. So why was it broken? This deck printed advantage. Pepe was one of the last big pendulum decks, and it made great use of everything the mechanic had to offer. This deck had tons of ways to set scales, and once they pendulum summoned, the game was over. The amount of advantage you got was just so much, and since games around this time were mostly determined by follow-up, it meant that unless you somehow managed to push through multiple rank 4s, an Omni Negate, and a potential Wavering Eyes, you would just fall over on the crackback. Pepe really felt like a deck from 2019, but in 2016. The deck would dominate for exactly 1 YCS before being banned beyond recognition. So what happened? Pepe got hit with the only ever adjusted list, which is just an out-of-season ban list that locals didn't have to abide by. It banned 3 cards and limited 3 more, and Konami has never done this before or since. After the list, Pepe would be dead, but the Pendulum slop decks would still be playable for a while until the actual ban list came out and destroyed it. Nowadays, every Pepe card is at 3, the only problematic one isn't even being played in Pendulum decks. 6 Samurai was released all the way back in 2007 and would see play as an aggro deck, but the version I'm sure you're more familiar with was playable in 2011. 2011 6 Samurai became a very powerful combo deck that could easily make giant boards of synchro monsters. Notable cards include Kageki, who summons a 6 Samurai from hand on summon, Kizan, who could summon itself from hand if you control a 6 Samurai, Shien, a spell trap negate, and Gateway of the 6, a continuous spell that effectively adds a 6 Samurai monsters as you summon them. So why was it broken? 6 Samurai was one of the oldest combo decks, and like Infernity before it, really felt like a modern deck if it went off. In fact, these 2 decks are likely what caused the creation of Max C. 6 Samurai usually just gets all the credit because Shien and the Roach came out in the same set. Though, to be fair, this deck did summon way more than the average deck at the time. High roll hands could easily make Shien, Naturia Beast, or Barkion, or Trishula, but the real pain point with the deck was Gateway. 6 Samurai was explosive, but if they opened Gateway, the game was just over. It got you so much gas and follow-up, and the fact that it was limited meant that it was all the more frustrating when your opponent did drop it. 6 Samurai would remain an off-and-on meta deck for the next few years before eventually falling out of favor. So what happened? Gateway got banned in 2013 in one of Yu-Gi-Oh's rotation lists, and even when it did come back in 2017, it didn't do too much. 6 Samurai was a decent rogue deck after their Link monster, but it never escaped the fact it's a super fragile combo deck. Even their newest support wasn't good enough. The quality of combo decks has just improved way too much for 6 Samurai to ever be relevant again. The Dragon Rulers were released in 2013 and were a series of level 7 dragons that all had 3 similar effects. They could summon themselves from hand or grave by banishing 2 dragons and or monsters that share their attribute from hand Commander grave, they added a dragon of their attribute when they were banished, and you could discard them plus a monster of their attribute for a unique effect. Blaster popped a card, Tidal dumped a monster, Redox reborn a monster, and Tempest searched for a dragon. They also bounced themselves back to hand in the end phase of the turn after they were special summoned, and you could only use one of their effects per turn. The archetype also included baby rulers for each respective daddy. Each one could discard themselves plus a monster of their attribute to summon their respective ruler from deck. So how is it broken? The dragon rulers were released towards the midway point of the Xyz era, and they were notable for being one of the few decks that could easily spam out high-level monsters and make use of the underexplored rank 7 pool. They had access to powerful bosses like Big Eye and Thunder Charger, but the real killer was Dracosack, who was released in the same set. Dracosack was big, indestructible, and could pop cards, but even in a world without these Xyz, the dragon rulers just had such an insane grind game. Since they could summon themselves from grave using material from grave, you were going to have to try and completely run them out of dragons, since it was very hard to hit over such big monsters every turn. The dragon rulers will be hit several times, but it would take until 2015 to finally get rid of them. So what happened? The dragon rulers had to be banned. Dark Matter Dragon was able to send 3 of them to grave for cost and set up some unreal OTKs. Then they stayed banned for way too long, not coming to 3 until 2024. By then they were well and truly power crept, and even a new wave of support wasn't enough. Orcust was released in 2019 and is notably the O in toss format. The main deck monsters can banish themselves from grave to summon an Orcust monster from a specific area, and the extra deck monsters all put back banished Orcust monsters for various effects. Notable cards include Harp Horror, who can banish itself from grave to summon an Orcust from deck, Galatea, who can return a banished Orcust to set a spell trap from the deck, and Babel, which made all your relevant effects into quick effects. This deck was also part of the World Legacy storyline, so it had a ton of synergy with the Nightmare monsters, notably Nightmare Mermaid, who could be made with any Nightmare, which only took 2 monsters, and it summoned Orcust Nightmare from deck, and that guy could banish himself from grave to dump a Dark Machine. So why was it broken? Orcust was arguably the best deck during toss format, and that's because it synergized so well with other decks. They liked Danger because they could easily discard your names, Phantom Knights because it allowed them to play Rusty Bardiche, and notably Sky Striker, since Hornet Drones got you full combo by itself. And the full combo often included an Omnigate, a non-target send, and IP into Unicorn, which for 2019 was a lot, and had follow-up too. It alongside its toss brethren would be so playable for the entire year that they would all receive significant hits at the start of 2020, killing Thunder Dragon and Sky Striker, and while it didn't kill Orcust and Salamangreat, it was a big deal. Orcust would have a brief resurgence in 2025 alongside some new support and is currently still playable as a side engine in some rogue decks. So what happened? Well, losing Harp Horror and Mermaid was a huge deal, and while they still don't have Mermaid back, Gearsu as well as their new Link monsters really helped the deck find a niche again. Not a huge niche, but definitely a playable one for the Orcust lovers out there.